Wow, look at this. We are burning through the talks today. Welcome back from your short trip away from Ash. And that talk was a very good talk. Right now, we've got Regö Porco Lab. Did I say it correctly?
Close enough. I'll take it.
Close enough. It's the American version. Sustainable game development from a game producer's perspective, which is always very wise because your producer is the guy that tells you what to do, when to do, how to do it, and helps you do it. So amazing. Welcome, and take it away.
Thank you. Awesome. So as Dan introduced, I'm going to be talking about this topic that is very close to my heart. And so I'll just jump right into it. So my name is Regö. I'm originally from Hungary, but I've been living in Denmark for 10 years now. And I'm currently studio director at the Flat Ponies. I've been at the studio for 5 years as a producer, and just 2 months ago, with January, I was promoted to studio director. So I pretty much I'm responsible for running the studio on a day-to-day basis. We've worked on a lot of games before we were called Flat Ponies, but the two that we shipped under this name is Active Robots back in 2020, and then Rebots here a couple months ago in October. Besides my full-time daily position at the Flat Ponies, I'm also an external lecturer at the IT University of Copenhagen, where I teach game production. And then finally, I'm also quite active in the local game dev scene as a co-organizer of a showcase called the Tomorrow's Awesome Game Showcase, or TAGS for short, which just had its second edition actually at the Copenhagen Gaming Week, which is like this big gaming festival here in Copenhagen. And we also organize Copenhagen Game Developer Talks. So a lot of things that I do, but I'll just go over to the actual topics. And I'm talking about sustainable game development, but that kind of implies that games are hard to make. And I really like this quote from the book Press Reset from Jason Schreier, where he asked, why are video games so hard to make? And the quote says, games straddle the line between art and science, where technological advancements and the challenge of finding the fun can make it near impossible to build accurate schedules. It can often feel, as the saying goes, like shooting a movie while simultaneously building the camera. And I think this quote really illustrates well why making games is hard, or like one part of it. This is, of course, very much sort of technical and how do you build things. But what I'll be focusing on is also sort of the human element, teams and people. And one of my favorite GDC talks is from Jeff Hasser, who I believe still works at Harmonix. But he has a really good talk about improving the culture of critique and communication. And so basically what he's done at Harmonix is that he asked people, how do you feel you're seen from other departments? And so it was really interesting because what he found out is that artists felt like they were seen by others as the people that always take too long. Designers are, just there to create work for others. Programmers are the ones that kill good ideas. UX and QA are just unskilled slackers. And then producers don't care about quality. They only care about the deliverables. And it's in stark contrast with his second question to everybody, which was, how do you want to be seen? And he got very different answers because artists said, well, they want to be seen as the people that think in terms of aesthetics and experience. Designers help contextualize the work for others. Programmers think in terms of systems and architecture. UX and QA have a robust understanding of the game across, various and multiple disciplines. And producers are the ones that are facilitating the process. So I think this perception and reality is very, very interesting. And I definitely recommend looking or listening to the GDC talk because it's very educational. So when I was doing my master thesis, and then ever since that I've been in the industry, my goal has pretty much been to create an environment where happy people in great teams can make awesome games with a sustainable process, and they make these games for players. So there's a couple of sort of pillars here, like people, teams, games, processes, and players. And I'm going to be focusing on the first four, and not talk much about sort of external things. This talk is very much about running processes and sort of internal culture, and sort of what is the role of the producer in that. So when doing the research, I I wanted it to be something that's sort of actionable, something that's practical, something that I could use in my day to day. And so I came up with these 6 principles and 12 actions, that is basically going to be the rest of this presentation. So these actions are building trust and facilitating cooperation. It's about aligning vision, communicating direction. It's to nourish motivation and protect health. It's about creating structures and making work visible. It's about driving coordination and facilitating alignment. And then finally, adapting to change and embracing uncertainty. So I believe these 6 principles and 12 actions are sort of the things that producers do on a day-to-day basis that allow this goal to basically be achieved. So we're going to go into the first topic, which is trust, building trust and facilitating cooperation. And I'm going to be talking about different topics within each of these that sort of make up the principle and sort of the actions. One of the most important things is to recognize when making games is because this is inevitably done in an interdisciplinary team. There's artists, there's coders, there's business people, there's marketing people, designers, etc., etc. That also means that there's a variety of backgrounds, personality types, cultures, and all kinds of various different things that just need to be taken into account, because every person works differently, every person behaves differently, every person sort of handles things differently. So it's very, very important to recognize and acknowledge people with their differences, and create processes that allow them to work together in an efficient manner. One of the sort of very important rules that I always think about is this platinum rule, which is something that I think I've seen Victoria Tran from Innersloth talk about it. But basically, the platinum rule is an improvement over the golden rule, which is how you treat people. And the golden rule says you should treat people the way you want to be treated. But the platinum rule says that you should treat people the way they want to be treated. And I think that little difference, that you're really trying to meet people on their own sort of state, or like, yeah, meet people where they want to be met, I think is very important to consider, because again, everybody is different, and you should make sure that they're acknowledged. And then finally, the building trust and cooperation is very much about feedback and critique and feedback loops in general. And that's just inherent to game development as well, the making of it, but also in how feedback is delivered and how critique is organized. And a big part of the talk that I mentioned before from Jeff Hesser is also very much about feedback critique. And we're going to dig into that a little bit, because I think it's really, really foundational. And one of my favorite books that deals with the topic is a book called Thanks for the Feedback, The Science and Art of Receiving Feedback from Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. And they talk about this a lot, because the book is about, well, you can't control the feedback you get, because, well, you will be getting it from someone or someplace. The only thing you can control is, well, how do you receive it? And one of the most important things to recognize is that there are different types of feedback. And so the three types are listed here. So those are coaching, evaluation, and appreciation. And the important thing about them is that if you're getting any of them, you should usually try to identify which one it is, because depending on what you're expecting, what your expectations are, you might be not well receiving to that feedback. So coaching is a type of feedback when you're trying to help someone improve. So it's working together with someone to become better at something. Evaluation is simple example would be a performance review, but really it's about when you say things that are good or things that are bad and how you should improve them. And then appreciation generally is just pretty much it's recognition for a job well done or things that worked out well. And these also sometimes combine, but it's really, really important to sort of be aware as a feedback giver on what you're trying to do, and also as a feedback receiver to sort of pick out and understand what it is that you're getting. And if you're looking for appreciation, but you get coaching, well, that will have some conflicts. Further on, there are a lot of issues with feedback, and usually they are because they are linked to triggers. And there are three triggers that most of us have when it comes to receiving feedback. These are called truth, relationship, and identity. And they address different, or like they're at different sort of stages, I suppose. So truth triggers basically are triggers when we think that the feedback we're getting is just wrong, right? That it might be that they don't understand what we've done and they're not, interested in or whatever. But what the feedback we're getting is just wrong, so it's really hard to deal with it. And it's just important to be mindful of that. Well, is that a mismatch between what we think is correct and not correct? Relationship triggers are the second type, and the problem with them is not the feedback, but it's the person that's giving the feedback. So it's maybe there's some past problems that are not surfaced or whatever it may be, but it's the problem is not the feedback itself. The problem is the relationship. And then finally, identity triggers are when the feedback is about who we are, or like the perception of who we are. And it's one of the hardest ones when it's feedback about ourselves and how we are or what have we done and all that sort of stuff. So it can be very, very powerful, but it's important to be recognizing when that happens and then sort of trying to deal with that. And there's tools to deal with that. Some of them are easier said than done. But still, there are some simple things that can be done to receive feedback well. First and foremost is to separate the feedback from the giver. That can be a solution to the relationship trigger, for instance, because it's really in order to grow and in order to improve, feedback is necessary, and sometimes feedback can come from unexpected places. So it's important to just try to understand the feedback and whether it's right or wrong or whatever, but then really try to separate it from the person that's giving it. Asking questions is a really, really good way of handling feedback. Asking for clarifications, like, what did you mean when you said this isn't good enough, or whatever the feedback might be, because it sort of also shows that you're interested in listening to the feedback, and it also helps you clarify whether any of the triggers are being hit or whatnot. It's always a good idea to reflect before reacting. I think this is the hardest one to do, because of course, as people, we have the fight or flight reflex, especially when feedback is negative potentially. But it is very, very important to sort of always, take a breath or take a breath and then sort of think before reacting. And then having a conversation, really, which sounds really sort of simple, but it is really feedback. Feedback is a conversation, and it should be treated as such, to sort of really understand what it is about. Moving on to the second principle, is about vision, aligning vision and communicating direction. And this is a really, really critical principle as well, because it is about establishing what it is that we're making. And of course, this is not necessarily the role of a producer in most companies. That's usually something that a creative director or game directors or game designers are responsible for, setting a direction, setting up game pillars or a Bible and all that sort of stuff. But regardless, the producer's role is to make sure that that has happened and that is happening. And that also that the vision and direction are constantly being reinforced. They constantly being brought up when features are being developed, because it's really, really easy to sort of what's it called? Stray from them. That's the word. Stray from them. So it's very, very important that they are sort of on top of importance. The second aspect of sort of this vision and direction is, of course, clear roles and responsibilities. That can be really challenging if there's uncertainty about who's supposed to do what and who's supposed to make this decision versus that decision, or there's no one to make a decision, which is probably even worse. So it's really, really important that, even in flat hierarchies, there are some roles and responsibilities and that they're visible to the team as well. And then ultimately, what I think sort of brings all of this together, which kind of already I mentioned, is communication, and really over communication, like things that are important, such as visions and directions and sort of core things. They just don't get boring. They need to be over communicated, because especially in larger teams, there's a lot of sort of trickle down communication happening. So you're not necessarily getting, the words or the direction from where it came from originally. So there might be a lot of steps to the communication. So it's really, really important to just make sure that they're constantly being reinforced and communicated. So the third principle is about motivation and health. And I think it is originally what my research sort of was looking into, of course, with as it started looking at it from the aspect of crunch, which is still, in some places quite prevalent. But I think it's sort of what I wanted to shift with is sort of a more positive approach. And so I think looking at it is like, well, not how do you motivate people, and how do you also protect their health to make sure that they can do and they can be creative and they can work on games for a long period of time without burning out. I've taken inspiration from a psychological theory called self-determination theory that sort of deals with different types of motivations, and the four I suppose like pillars or aspects of motivation, and particularly talking about intrinsic motivation that comes from the inside, not extrinsic ones like money or punishment, are autonomy, purpose, competence, and relatedness. So autonomy is about allowing people to work on things that they want to work on, when they want to work on them, how they want to work on them. And of course, there is a slight contrast here, because of course you need people to work on things that they should be working on. But I think if there's a framework on what they're supposed to achieve, which is also about purpose, but giving them the autonomy to carry out the work how they want to do it, I think that definitely helps with motivation. The second aspect is purpose, and purpose is people like having goals and working towards goals, and then achieving goals, so they can celebrate and eat chocolate and whatnot. So purpose is also a very important motivator, so that you feel like that you're working towards something that's bigger than yourself. Competence is the third one. Their name for it is mastery, and it's really about becoming a better person, either a better skill or a better artist, a better programmer, but it also is about a better communicator or a better feedback receiver or feedback giver, for that matter. And then finally, the fourth aspect is relatedness. And again, that's about just really human nature, that we want to we're social people. We want to be with others. We want to work with others, and so just working together is just very, very important for motivation. So I think, again, going back to the original goal of sort of creating an environment where these four motivation aspects are fulfilled, people tend to be happy and motivated. Health is also about maintaining a good health, which is not just physical health, but also mental health and emotional health. These are all important aspects of health, and one of the biggest problems with crunch and burnout is, of course, is that it affects hugely mental and emotional, but also physical health. So I think it is really, really important to be sort of mindful of not just one, but all types of health. And then also making sure that people have growth opportunities, both personal growth and also professional. So it kind of goes back to the competence and or mastery aspect of motivation. And here's a list of sort of tips and tricks I would give for people if they want to stay motivated and healthy. They don't fix everything on their own, but they do a lot. So taking breaks, sleeping enough. Some people don't need 8 hours, but most people do. Exercising, eating healthily, and drinking lots of water goes a long way. On topic of that, I should. So please drink water. So moving on to the fourth principle, which is about structure and making work visible. This is, I suppose, the principle that's most traditionally like the job of the producer or manager, right? So it's very much about setting up processes and making sure that the development is smooth. There's yet another reference to a fantastic GDC talk from Seth Koester from Butterscotch Shenanigans called Stress-Free Game Development, Powering Up Your Studio with DevOps. I highly recommend looking at it because he goes much more into depth of the topics that I'll talk about. But pretty much what it is about is, and this is sort of directly from sort of DevOps principles, is this system thinking and flow theory. So system thinking is about that you're looking at development as from the start to finish. So whenever ideas come up for features or whatnot, and how they progress through concepting, design documents, to prototypes, to evaluating those prototypes, and then implementation, bug fixing, polishing, and then actually shipping a feature, or like a feature being completed. And it's really about making sure that this flow is as efficient as possible and goes from sort of left to right, so from in one direction. And the important thing is that this is also visible because, well, you want to make sure that you see if you get stuck at certain places in the process, which we'll get to with bottlenecks and waste. The second aspect of this is feedback loops. So basically, you have all these development steps, and then what you want is that each step have feedback loops feeding into the previous one. So for instance, when a prototype is created, that there's a playtest for that prototype, and the playtest data is then evaluated, and then before moving into implementation, problems that are brought up in that playtesting are fixed or reevaluated. Because the thing is, the earlier you are in the process, the easier it is and the cheaper it is to change things. It is very easy to have ideas. It is still relatively easy to concept things and fast and make designs and prototype things. But once you start implementing things and polishing them, that's sort of the last, I like to say, like the last 20% of a feature takes the last 80% of the work. So it can take a significant amount of time. So you really want to make sure that you polish the right things. And you do that with good feedback loops. And then the third thing is experimentation and learning. So this whole process of moving from left to right and feedback loops feeding back from right to left are constantly being experimented, and then there's this freedom to learn and fail, and sort of take knowledge, or like take those learnings and then improve the process, but and improve the features and everything else. So it's really about this iterative approach and iterative process that we're talking about here. And an important aspect of that is, of course, bottlenecks and waste, because every process has bottlenecks, every process has waste, but the amount of like the size of bottlenecks and the waste is it can differ significantly. So it's important to dig into that a little bit. And bottlenecks specifically are what they sound like. They are sort of an aspect of the process, or part of the process, that is getting more work than it can handle. And the problem, or well, it's not a problem, but like the thing with a bottleneck is that is the thing that sets the speed of development. So the only way to increase work output, to make things go faster and more efficient, is if you increase the capacity of the bottleneck. So as an example, let's say that someone has to review everything one by one. If that is the case, then however fast that person can review things is going to set the pace for the development process. And if that's causing problems, that's something that needs to be looked at. There's other, and bottlenecks always exist. There's always something, but the other main takeaway from this is that, well, if you can make improvements in any other part of the process, but if you don't improve your bottleneck, then it's not going to matter, because it is your bottleneck that sets the pace of your development. And then there's a bunch of types of waste, and I'll just be very brief about them, because I highly recommend just watching the video from Seth, really. But I'll just briefly go through each of them. So motion is a type of waste when information has to go back and forth. So think useless meetings can be a type of motion, or talking about the same thing multiple times and not really getting from A to B. And so that's a type of waste. Task switching can be, I think it's quite common. That's there's uncertainty about what is the most important thing, or what is the highest priority, and then getting people to switch between stuff that they're working on, or being disturbed can sometimes be like, oh, can you help me build this thing very quickly? And while it might speed up your workload, it can be quite damaging to other people's productivity. Especially, I think coders suffer from this a lot, especially when they have sort of when they're working on sort of systems and are in deep work. This can be extremely damaging when they have to sort of return to flow and focus mode. Defects or bugs are, of course, waste. And well, you can't not have bugs, but you can reduce the amount of bugs that are created if things are thought through from the get-go, and that you have a very intentional architecture. Another type of waste is waiting. So if someone cannot progress on something because let's say someone needs to create a storyboard, but they're waiting on a script. If they don't have a script, they can't work on that. They might work on something else, but if that's not the most important thing, well, then it is waste, that they're just sort of waiting around, and it can be problematic as well. Unfinished projects or features are also a type of waste, and they're mostly because there's already been work spent on them. So the usual, the solution is to just kill them. This is the killing your darlings sort of thing, because they just take up space, mental and other kinds of space as well. So just either finish them if they're important, or get rid of them. Manual processes can be waste. If it can be automated, it should be. And there's a lot of aspects of game development that can be automated, and should be. Build pipelines and applying materials, if they're applied at the same way all the time. There's a lot of things that can be automated. So tools come in handy very much to reduce waste. Extra processes that are there for some reason that maybe nobody knows, and reevaluating processes often, it's just important to get them, because if they're not needed, then just drop doing them. And then if it doesn't cause problems, then they weren't important in the first place. The same with extra features, is that just don't do them. There's enough features and ideas will always come. So just don't. And then the final one, which is of course again a reference back to crunch, is heroics. And the problem with heroics is that the reason you have to stay up late or work on things is sometimes, yes, unrealistic schedules and other problems, but it's also because all these other types of wastes are just eating up so much development time, so that you actually resort to just fighting fires instead of having a solid process where you're delivering actual quality features and things that players need. Yeah, it's more of a symptom of all the other types of wastes, but it is equally, if not more damaging than the rest. Right. So moving on to coordination and alignment, which is about meetings. And I'm one of those, I think, weird people that like meetings. I think producers do like meetings quite often. But I think the problem usually is, and why people hate meetings for very, very good reasons, is because they are not well organized. And they also suffer from, I think that, well, the reference is from Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage, is that they suffer from meetings too. And he calls meetings to the fact that there are different types of meetings that you should have, which you can see also in the slides here, which I'll go into in a sec. But the problem is that people mix them up together. And then again, the expectations are not met at the same time. And so that results in not efficient meetings. So what do I mean by these different types of meetings? There's administrative, there's tactical, there's strategic, and then developmental. So administrative meetings, the very simple thing to think about is stand-ups, whether you do Scrum or whatever else kind of agile, whatnot. You usually, people teams usually have some kind of check-in or stand-up meeting, and that's an administrative meeting. It's short, 10 to 15 minutes maximum, depending on your team size. We are 15 people and we rarely go above 10 minutes, for instance, at Flight Bonus. And it's really about 2 or 3 things. It's about making sure people say what they're working on that day, making sure that they're not blocked to work on the thing that they need to work on that day. And then also highlighting if there's anything that they're working on that's not visible. That goes back to the previous principle about systems thinking and sort of making work visible. Is that if work is not visible, then it's really hard to measure it and understand what's going on. So administrative meetings really serve only this purpose, to ensure that there's alignment on a daily basis on what's getting done and who needs help if they're blocked. Tactical meetings are mostly about planning. So they can be the weekly planning, or if there's cycles or sprints, 2-3 week whatnots. That's what tactical meetings about. It's about planning what the next thing is going to be. It can be about looking through the backlog and picking the stuff that are going to be worked on in the next iteration. And they can be a bit longer. Their purpose is really to talk about the things that are already defined and how long they take, how long will they take. So it's estimation as well. And then sort of making sure that that things are planned. The third type of meeting is the one that is the most unstructured one, because strategic ones come up usually from administrative and tactical meetings, when there's uncertainty, when things are being blocked, when there's issues, or when there's design stuff that needs to be discussed. Strategic meetings tend to be then discussing those things and actually, workshops, design workshops, ideations, whatnot. And then, if that's the expectation, then that's what needs to happen. And then people also have the mindset to be in that, position, solving problems or coming up with ideas. Then they are really, really powerful, and they're an important part of making games. So those are strategic meetings. And then finally, developmental meetings are, again, referring back to the previous principles, experimentation and learning. It's about becoming better. Retrospectives are a good example of them. Postmortems, of course, postmortems come quite not so frequently, but it's meetings when we talk about when things didn't go so well. But also in the case of, let's say, a live game, if there's an incident with maybe the servers going down because of reason X, Y, Z, it's usually a good idea to run a postmortem or like a retrospective on what happened and why, and what kind of processes need to be set up so that they don't happen in the future. And again, just to reiterate, as long as these meetings are clear and separated from one another and people know what to expect when they go into certain meetings, and they also, in the case of specifically like tactical and strategic meetings, if they know what is the agenda, why am I supposed to be here, and then it's the right people at the meeting, and then there's also clear action points or next steps from the meeting, then meetings can be really, really, really powerful and even enjoyable. So try it out. One aspect that's worth mentioning within this principle is the concept of asynchronous work, and I think especially with Corona and then all the shutdown and a lot of switch to remote work, and even now with a lot of studios moving back into offices or keeping sort of a flexible work structure, asynchronous work can be really, really powerful. For instance, administrative type of meetings about what I'm working on or whatnot can be easily handled asynchronously. It has the advantage of allowing people to, while giving them a lot of flexibility, it also ties back into the motivation aspect, into autonomy, into giving people the freedom to work, in a flexible, with flexible working hours or from home or in the office or whatnot. And then not necessarily having to be in the same place. It doesn't work for everything, and it can be, it both can be because it reduces meetings, so it can be good for mental fatigue and whatnot, but it can also be, if there's no human connection, then it can suffer because there's no relatedness, and some things are easier in person. So I think asynchronous work is not a sort of it's just it fixes everything or it doesn't work at all. But I think the option and the flexibility to run certain things like that can be really, really powerful. So yeah. And then the final aspect of the final principle is about adapting to change and embracing uncertainty, because all of the things that I talked about so far are sort of very, practical things or like day-to-day stuff. But the thing is, a lot of the producer work is also about planning ahead, making up contingency plans, looking at schedules and timelines, ensuring or looking at budgets and sort of making sure that things are progressing as they should be, which just not even factoring in things like a pandemic. There's just a lot of uncertainty about that, and just inherently in game development there's a lot of uncertainty. So I think embracing that mindset about, well, embracing a growth mindset and embracing that is part of the role and part of the job, that's something you need to navigate on an ongoing basis, and having plans for, well, everything. And then if things are fine, then that's great, but things are usually not fine, so or they're fine, but so this is sort of it ties the rest of the principles together. um, Collecting and evaluating data is really, really important in this aspect. And going back to all the other things that I talked about, this is, it sounds very data driven, but it's not necessarily about the game, but it's about It's about talking to people, gathering information about their motivation, about the vision of the game, talking with playtesters, understanding what kind of data we're getting. So it's everything that gives us information really about the processes, about the team, about individuals, about the game, and then sort of considering all of that, trying to analyze it, evaluating it, and then feeding that information back into the process, and then improving it on an ongoing basis. I think is what it is about, and it is also about change management. And of course, people tend not to like change, but I think in especially the games industry, which is an extremely fast-moving one, both like technologically, and the market changes all the time. What game was popular a year ago might, not be popular anymore, or a similar game will not be as popular. And so, just handling changes is super, super important, but also internally, when things are not working out, when there's a vision and a direction maybe, and then ideas are being tested but they're not getting the results we need, then we need to change things. And I think the important stuff about change management is that, well, it has to be done, but it has to be done in a way that people feel that they are part of the process of change. So it's something, anytime that there's a change, either with features or direction, or whatever, it's important to communicate advantages and disadvantages of change, and then also just being open or being open to feedback and asking people's input, whether decisions that are being made, why are decisions being made, and how to handle that. So that's what this principle is about. It's more of it's less, I guess, hands-on or less practical than the other ones, but it's just as important, nonetheless. So yet again, just a summary of the 6 principles and 12 actions, is that as producers that we do to be able to make awesome games with happy people, great teams, and sustainable processes. You need to build trust and facilitate cooperation. You need to align vision and communicate direction. You need to nourish motivation and protect health. You need to create structures and make them visible. You need to drive coordination and facilitate alignment. And you also need to adapt to change and embrace uncertainty. And the the important thing with these principles are that there is a hierarchy to this. There is a reason why I say trust and cooperation is number one, vision is number two, etc. Because especially when setting up a new team, but or when joining a team as a producer, I think there is an order in which you need to address this. It is really hard to talk about motivation and health, or without having a a vision and direction to work towards. It's hard to have a vision and direction and expect people to believe in that and work towards it if there's not trust in the team. So there is a fundamental step-by-step process in here that I think is important to follow. It's also noted that once you kind of go through it the first time, it is something that all of these are important. They are interconnected. While I was talking, I mentioned how structure relates to motivation and all that, all the different examples. So they are all interconnected. I kind of imagined it sort of like a triangle, circle, whatnot, and then all these lines are connected. And they need to be addressed, not necessarily at the same time. You don't always have to make sure people are have a trusting relationship, but if it gets broken, then it is something you need to work on. Or it is often that things are going fine and people understand the vision and they're working on things, but inevitably, because projects take a long time, it will slip. New people will be added to the team. People will leave the team. So then you need to reiterate, you need to go back to that. So it's this constant sort of balance. And for me, balance is very active. Like it's not a, you're not just standing and not sort of doing anything. Balance is a very active thing that you're sort of moving and addressing these different things as they pop up. And when there's nothing wrong and everything's fine, then you can work on looking at contingency plans and seeing how things are going to break. So yeah, and the final note with these principles to me is that this is not easy to do. And it's not something that you do in a day, in a week, in a month. It is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's something that's just continuous. And I think that's the exciting part of being a producer, really, is that it's never a boring day, and it's never the same day. So yeah. And I want to end with yet another quote, this time from Rami Ismail, from his Leveling the Playing Field newsletter, because I think it really encapsulates and sort of summarizes my approach to what a producer's role is. What he says is that it can be easy to forget when you're an indie struggling to make games while staying afloat. But a majority of really difficult problems at game studios aren't technical problems or design problems or even financial problems, but they are people problems. They are issues of motivation, ownership, accountability, communication, alignment, boundaries, and trust. And I don't think it's just for indie studios. It is also the same in AA and AAA. And so I think addressing these is the role and the responsibility of a producer, and it's quite important. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, you can drop it down below, and you can also reach out if you later.
Yes. Questions, and then also if there's more questions for Regö, if you could go into the AMA.
Yes.
The AMA afterwards. AMA questions in the Discord. And also, Catherine, I posted a link if you want to get all of if anyone wants to get all of the presentations from the talks, there's an Eventbrite link there. That's how we know who to send out all the stuff. So thank you so much. All right. So Catherine does have a question. Catherine from YouTube. Do you have any favorite tools that support this type of sustainable game dev, especially for small, less than 5 people teams?
So I'm just gonna I'm assuming tools by you mean something that allows you to track tasks and stuff like that. What do we use? So I'm just gonna answer that. I think when you're a small 5 people team, I think keeping it simple is important. I think the process and the tools that are the best are the ones that work for your team. So if I were to say, if we're looking at simple sort of task tracking, then I think Trello does a great job, or any kind of Kanban board, really, I think sort of gets you most of the way. I think the moment you're above 8-10 people, you might want something a little bit more powerful. We currently use Linear, which is a quite good tool, but I think that the tool itself doesn't really matter. I think there's really good ones otherwise. Another one that I recommend is I think Miro, which is a digital whiteboard, and I think it just helps with asynchronous communication, helps with designs, helps with visualizing and making work visible for artists. It's maybe less useful for coders, but I think it just allows you to be really visible about a lot of things. So I would say, if you're looking for like 2 practical tools, I think Trello for simple task tracking, and then Miro for everything else that you might need are 2 I would recommend.
Yeah, we use Jira and the team I'm working with now. So here's a question from Cybershell Rev on YouTube. I know most companies would never do this, but would equally divided revenue / transparent financing resolve all trust issues?
That's a good question. I mean, it's hard to say, right? Because if you equally divide revenue, that assumes that everyone has the exact same risk. associated in the project, right? And I think, I mean, the experience that I have is that, you know, we have, the company has an investor, and you know, we have a monthly salary, but the risk is not on us as employees. The risk is on, you know, founders that are owning the company and investors that are putting the money into it. So I think that part makes it a little bit hard. I know that there exists co-ops, like when people own the company together. I don't know how they function, but that is one way I think looking at it. That, like, definitely revenue share models, you know, that if people are, you know, getting a cut from the pie, if a game is successful, definitely helps. But I think fundamentally money is part of motivation and trust to an extent, but I think, like, trust between people is sort of more fundamental than just that. I think it's about working together with people for a longer period of time, knowing what, you know, makes them tick, what makes them laugh, what makes them cry even, and sort of, you know, working together. So yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, but I think it's yeah, it's not exactly just that. Yeah.
Samantha had a comment. We started using Taiga recently and love it. That's open source, like Jira, I
Oh,
guess.
sweet. I've never heard
Yeah,
of it, but I should check it out.
open source and free. I just looked it up. It's a
Nice.
free and open source project management tool.
Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool because, you know, producers really get in there and mess with all the settings of like Jira
Oh, yeah.
or whatever. And so every experience with every team is going to be different. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Here we
know
go.
there's a Codex also has like a gamified project management tool, which seems very interesting. I forgot what it's called, but yeah. Anyway.
Okay, here's another question from chat from Luis Ochoa. How important are retrospectives when there's a tight deadline for deliverables?
Oh, that's a very good question. I mean, I would still have them. I think, I mean, we run, our cycle lengths are monthly. So like we have 3-week cycles, and then we have sort of a cool down period, and that's where we run retrospectives. I think again, it depends also on the game, because if you're in, and what stage of development you're in. So like if you're in pre-production or in production and sort of just, you know, chugging along, I think a good sort of cadence makes sense, and then you just have it whenever those happen, or at bigger milestones or whatnot. Of course, if you need to be more reactive, I think if the like, depending on whether you're evaluating individual instances of issues or evaluating like everything, you know, that might be a problem. So I think it depends a little bit on the type of retrospective you run, but I would say even with tight deliverables, like you will still have another one after that. So if you're not taking the time to improve and learn and make your process better, then you're just kind of, you know, rolling, like, you know, pushing the problem down the line but not really solving it. So my answer would have to be, it is still important.
Yeah. Well, we are in alpha, and we do a 2-week release train. So every 2 weeks on Wednesday it's submitted. There's like a code freeze a week before, but I mean, you have to be like, what worked, what didn't work, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Here's what Samantha Neville says. I run our retrospectives and review at the end of the sprint and plan for it with the releases.
Yeah, I think that it's good when they're matched with releases or what. Yeah.
It makes sense that people don't always need more money, but rather a quality of life being the goal.
Yeah.
All right. So we got a couple minutes left. So post your questions in the chat so I can bring them up. But I have some other ones up here that I've written down from listening. You talked about people problems. One of my sayings is like the only problem with every organization is the people that are in it, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise it would be perfect, but it's always a person something. So people problems more than technical. What are the most common people related challenges you've seen in teams?
I think unclear roles and who makes decisions. I think the other most common one is taking feedback, whether that's hierarchy downwards or back, doesn't really matter. It's really difficult. So um, I think handling feedback, especially about the game and things that people work on, right? People are really talented, uh, which means that they're really good, but they can just, it's really hard letting go and allowing people to criticize your work. But I just think that's what I have experienced with most, seeing that also at our studio, but also when I teach, and the students are just, that's the thing they struggle with, that that they need to learn how to separate the the feedback from themselves, that you're not the one being criticized, but it's the work that you've done. And of course, when people mess up, then they are being criticized, but that is part of it, and that also needs to be learned. So
yeah, that's good. Don't fall in love with your own work because it might not, just because you love it doesn't mean that other people do, right? And then also for me, like the just different personalities, right? I am a very certain way, and I guess I'm kind of an idealist about things. At least that's what my dad always told me. And so I like think a certain way, and still even now sometimes I struggle with people thinking different than I do in a lot of ways, and it's more about accepting the fact that people do think different, not that they're wrong, but that they're different.
I really like a saying that I heard from Thomas Holt, who used to work at IO and then was teaching here in Copenhagen. And he said the reason that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth is that you should use your ears more often. And I think that's what it is about. It's about listening. It's about empathizing. It's about understanding people. Just remember, more ears than mouth.
Yeah. And it's kind of like when you point at someone, you have 3 fingers pointing back at yourself.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay. So how do you personally define sustainable game development, and how is it different from traditional game production?
Yeah, so my definition would be that if you're addressing the 6 principles and doing the 12 actions that I talk about, then I think you're doing work sustainably. If the traditional one compared to that, and it's a very broad look at it, and I'm currently just reading the Blizzard book, Play Nice, from Jason Schreier, and it's just, they say that it's chaos it's management by chaos. That was their process. So whoever shouted the loudest sort of got their way, and sort of there wasn't any processes. It was just about, but again, whoever shouted the loudest. But it also came at a cost of insane working hours. And you can argue about the success of the games that was the result of that. And yes, you can't argue that WoW and Diablo and all those are not really good games. But I also think that there's a really big cost to that. And again, if you read the book, there's a huge like cost to people's personal lives, and the burnout they suffered and whatnot. And I think for some people it might be worth it. It's not worth it for me, and it's not worth it, I think, for our team. But it's it's hard.
Hard. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And if you all have more questions, come into the Discord, into the AMA section. We've got a couple more talks coming up. So thank you so much for coming on here. We really appreciate you.
Thank you very much for letting me say my things.